we'll start with the this anatomy of hip joint from the beginning. Anatomy of hip joint is nothing but a ball and socket joint, which involves both the acetabulum and the femoral head. It is an articulation between acetabulum and the femoral head. It is supported by the ligament of head of ligamentum teres and with acetabular labrum, making up the most important ligaments around the hip joint. Now, regarding the history of THR, the first for an arthritic hip, the first procedure done was restriction orthoplasty by Girdlestone. This is known as the Girdlestone orthoplasty, and further on further research, what they did was an interpersonal orthoplasty. They used a gold foil to place between the head and the acetabulum, which reduces the pain between them. And the third procedure they did was in cup orthoplasty. They placed a cup between over the femoral head to reduce the pain during the articulations. And the last, finally, the newer concept was an endoprosthesis, which involves
ready பண்ணிக்கலாம் கேட்டானா
hello. Yes, the final concept was an endoprosthesis, which involves hemiarthroplasty and total hip replacements. On 1912, Sir Robert Jones used gold foils and interposition. From 1923, they have used mold orthoplasties. And on 1937, they used Vitalium as an alloy of copper chromium, which is used being as an cup orthoplasty. In 1950, Juliet has used femoral head with methacrylate. In 1952 was the newer concept introduced with endoprosthesis. This is an image of an gold foil used between femoral head and acetabulum, and this is an example of a cup orthoplasty, where this is also an X-ray picture of cup orthoplasty placed between femoral head and acetabulum, which helps in the pain management. Now, this newer concept of total hip orthoplasty was initially given by Sir John Chanley in the year 1960. He introduced the system of concept of low friction total hip orthoplasty. He introduced 3 important points in managing a total hip orthoplasty. The first thing he ever did was he used a smaller head, 22 mm head, to reduce the friction between head and acetabulum. The second was a metal on polyethylene design. And third was mineralization of acetabulum and lateralization of trochanter to increase the abductor lever arm, resulting in low friction of interface. We are going to see what is mineralization, lateralization, and the biomechanics of the THR. This is the biomechanics that involves in total hip replacement. See this. Consider this W as a weight of the body. W is the weight of the body which is acting downwards. Now head of femur. Head of femur acts as a fulcrum. The distance of B is roughly around 2.5 centimeters. Okay. This head of femur acts as a fulcrum, maintaining the body weight. This abductor musculature has to act at 2.5 times more than that of the body weight to maintain the body in the equilibrium. This head of femur acts as a fulcrum. This distance is A is considered as 1 and B as 2.5. In the problem in THR is problem in arthritic hip and DDH is that the ratio is being increased. It is becoming 4:1, thus increasing the load on the abductor musculature and increasing the pain, and the arthritic pain is becoming severe. So the main aim of us is to maintain this ratio at an angle of 1:1. This is what we are going to do in THR. Maintain the ratio of 1:1. This should be 1, and this should also be maintained at the ratio of 1. This is the normal mechanism. The head acting as a fulcrum, body weight moving downwards, and the abductor musculature is acting upwards at more than 2.5 times the normal thing. This is the biomechanics. And what we have to do is to maintain this at a ratio of 1:1. Now, what does then THR implant needs? It has to maintain the lever arm to abductor arm ratio at the ratio of 1:1. So this distance should be 1, and from the midpoint to the trochanter it should be 1. This is what we should attain. We should achieve with the total hip replacement. This is achieved by two things. By reaming the acetabulum, we can make the relaxation of acetabulum, and by lateralizing and making this abductor arm increasing, we can increase the lateralization of trochanter. This is what we are going to achieve in THR. This is what we are going to do. And these are the components of total hip replacement. We have two important components. One is the femoral component, and the other one being the acetabular components. The femoral component includes femoral stem, femoral head, and femoral neck. Whereas acetabular component includes the liner and the acetabular component. The two things are important in the acetabular component. Femoral components. The first thing we come across now is the femoral components. The femoral component's important aim is to replace the femoral neck and head after the resection of articulating segments. This is the mostly important in maintaining the mechanical stable hip joints and determining factor. And the femoral component is depends upon three important things: horizontal offset, vertical offset, and the version. These three things mainly influence the outcome of THR and total hip replacement. We are going to see each one by one in the following slides. Now, the first thing we see is an horizontal offset. Horizontal offset is nothing but the distance between central head of femur till the tip of the greater trochanter. This is the horizontal offset. This determines nothing but the abductor mechanism. This determines the abductor force. And the vertical offset is nothing but the distance between head of femur and the tip of the lesser trochanter. This determines the limb length of the limb length. So the horizontal offset determines the abductor arm, and the vertical offset determines the lower limb. Now for vertical offset, we are done. Now the third thing is the version. Version is nothing but the orientation of femoral neck. This is the orientation of femoral neck in accordance to the coronal plane. So, normally the degree of anti-version is 10 to 15 degrees, and we have to maintain this in total hip replacement to achieve the desired values. Now, regarding the femoral head, there are two types of heads we can use during a total hip replacement. One thing being, one is the smaller head and the larger head. There are differences between smaller head and larger head. What we usually prefer is the larger head, because we prefer the larger head because it has got an increased jump distance, greater arc of motion, lesser impingement, and less prone for dislocation. Regarding jump distance is nothing but the distance needed for the head to travel to come out of displacement. This is the jump distance. This is the distance needed for the head to travel to come out of dislocation. For larger head, we have a larger jump distance and also the larger range of motion. So we usually prefer a larger head during the total hip replacements, which helps in better range of motion and lesser jump distance and less prone for dislocations. Now, cemented femoral components. Ideally, what is being used is that ideally it is a 13 centimeter value, 13 centimeter, and the medullary canal should occupy 80%. The component we use should occupy 80% of the medullary canal, and less 20% is should be rest 20% is to be accommodated by the cement. And the cement mantle should be 5 mm in proximal and 2 mm in the distal. The most common cement we use is polymethyl methacrylate. Now these are some examples of cemented femoral stems. This is the CPT stem, Calderless polished tapered stem. This is also a summit stem. These are some examples of femoral stem. Now, for uncemented femoral components, in 1970s they found out that cement has got some problems, and we have started inventing some cementless implants. So for which what we require is mechanical stability, and there should be an intimate contact between implant surface and the viable host tissue. This is very important in using uncemented femoral components to achieve the biological fixation we need. So for which we use polymethyl methacrylate. So there are two types to achieve stability in the cementless implants. We have two important things. One is the porous coating, and another is the non-porous coating. So this is an example of porous and non-porous coating. This is an example of porous coating materials. Here in porous coating we have bony ingrowth, and in non-porous coating we have bone on growth. These two things are very important in further slides. So porous coating, this is done by in forms of beads and meshes. There will be minute pores present over the femoral components at a size of 100 to 400 micrometer. It works on the principle of bony ingrowth. This is what happens in the porous coating. But the disadvantage in the porous coating is that we need heating, and this reduces the fatigue strength of the implant. So we usually do not prefer the porous coating. For non-porous coating, the bony on growth occurs. The viable bone grows over the roughened areas of the implant and offers the stability. This is done by grid blasting and plasma. We usually prefer non-porous coating materials. This is an example of bony ingrowth. This is in a bony ingrowth. It is in porous coating. The bone grows inside the porous material, and it offers the stability. This is the bony outgrowth. Bony on-growth occurs in non-porous coating. Non-porous coating. It is a roughened surface of the implant, which is helpful in making the bone grow over the surface and provide the stabilities. So these are some examples of porous coatings and non-porous coatings. There are some types of femoral stem implants we use in the daily practice, from type 1 to type 6. Type 1 femoral implants are specifically designed. These 6 types are designed anatomically to accommodate each and every different individuals. In type 1, it is type 1 there is a tapering at the mediolateral surface. Here for type 2, there is both tapering in AP as well as in the mediolateral surfaces. These are some tapered, rounded organs in the third type. In the fourth type, we have a cylindrical, fully coated implants. Number 5 is the modular implants, where we can adjust each and every neck and the neck areas. This sixth one is the anatomical implants. These are now coming to the acetabular components. We have 2 types of acetabular components. One is the cemented acetabular component, another one being the uncemented acetabular components. Cemented acetabular components, we rarely use cemented acetabular components in these days because it's only used in the tumor reconstruction or revision orthoplasty. In the primary total hip replacement, we do not use a cemented acetabular component. Now, for uncemented acetabular components, there are 2 important things being used in the uncemented acetabular component. One, the liner, another being the shell. The shell, it has a smooth inside to prevent backside wear. And the shell has got a porous outgrowth, porous material. This shell, it articulates with the acetabulum, wherein the bony ingrowth occurs. So bony ingrowth porous coated is commonly used in the uncemented total hip replacement. Now, for the important use of acetabular is to fix the transacetabular screws and inner transacetabular screws fixed with the flexible instrumentations with the acetabulum. The reaming is being done at 1 to 2 mm higher to obtain the pressure fit in the acetabulum. So the next thing we apply is the liner. Liner is made up of the polyethylene material. This is very important because it acts articulates between the femoral head and the acetabulum. It has got a non-articulating surface in contact with the inner shell of the acetabulum and the articulating surface with the femoral head. This is the important part of the liner. This is the important thing obtained between the liner. There are some four options available in the liner. It is standard flat liner, posterior lip without antiversion, 4 mm lateralized flat, and anti-verted 20 degrees. Now the problems we face in the liner is that because of backside wear, we face the problems such as osseolysis in liner. The osseolysis being that there's an hole, there will be holes in the acetabular screws where we do not fix all the screws. So when the liner has some polyethylene debris which gets into the gets into the acetabular hole and destroys the acetabular bone. This is called as osseolysis. So to prevent this osseolysis, the polyethylene should be polished in the interior of the acetabular components on metal shell. So to avoid this osseolysis, we usually use anti-protrusio rings and cages. This has got some extra holes in the ilium and ischium, and also some cages to prevent the bone grafting material to come out. To maintain the bone grafting material at the point of time, we use anti-protrusio cage with the screw holes into the extra screw. So these are some anti-protrusio cages. Here we can have some extra screws inserted in the ilium and ischium, and these extra things will extra cages will make the bone grafting to be placed at the exact space, and it does not make it go away. But the disadvantages of anti-protrusio cages is that it requires an extensive approach and more soft tissue damages. Now, to prevent this osseolysis, now we got some alternative bearings to prevent the osseolysis, which is happening secondary to the polyethylene debris. There are three things. Now we use highly cross-linked polyethylene, metal-on-metal bearings, and ceramic-on-ceramic bearings. These three things are now being used to overcome the problem of osseolysis. First, highly cross-linked polyethylene. Highly cross-linked polyethylene. This involves sterilization. Normally, the polyethylene liners are sterilized with 2.5 millirads of electron beam and gamma radiations. But these cross-linked polymers are achieved by radiating to higher degrees, up to 5 to 10 million rads. 5 to 10 million rads, and this helps 5 to 10 million rads excessively. It is being irradiated, which is then post irradiation. It is being done by two processes: remelting and annealing. Now, the difference between remelting and annealing is that with remelting, what we do is we heat the material above its melting point, above more than 135. This reduces the crystallinity and toughness is being reduced. In case of annealing, we reduce it below we heat the material below the melting point. But the disadvantage of this is that free radicals are not completely eliminated, but crystallinity is maintained. So to eliminate even the residual free radicals, we use vitamin E doping, which is used to completely remove the free radicals. Now, coming to metal-on-metal bearings, the metal-on-metal bearings involves high carbon, cobalt, chromium alloys. These precipitate to form carbides. The carbides are the high tensile strength. They have more metallic matrix and 5 times harder than the metallic matrix. This has got some high resistance, but these are not regularly in use because it has got so many disadvantages. The most common being high metal ion levels in their body. Instead of metal and metal, when metal and metal bearings are used, there is a high level of ions in the serum. This is mostly prone for malignancies. Renal excretion of these ions predisposes for impaired renal failure. Perivascular infiltrates and aseptic lymphocytic vascularity associated lesions can occur around the implants. So the next important problem is the pseudotumor, because the pain and the periarticular fluid collection gives us an appearance of a mass formation mimicking a pseudotumor. So the metal-on-metal bearings nowadays is not being used because of these disadvantages. The next being the ceramic-on-ceramic metal bearings. So normally we used metal femoral head polyethylene acetabular, metal femoral head polyethylene acetabular cup. But now in ceramic inserts, we use ceramic femoral head and ceramic inserts. This alumina ceramina is the commonly used material on ceramic, but it is very harder than metals, and it has gotten some high resistance for wear and tear. But the main problem is main disadvantage of using ceramic and ceramic implants is the stripe wear and also the squeaking noise that occurs when the patient walks. The stripe wear and squeaking are the most important disadvantages on ceramic bearings. Now we go on for the indications of surgeries. The most common indication is the pain. Only pain is pain is being the commonest indication for doing a surgery. And osteoarthritis is the pain is produced mainly by the osteoarthritis. There could be primary or secondary osteoarthritis occurring to dysplasia of hip, coxa plana, post-traumatic, and skiffy. And the second and the rest being the osteonecrosis, the inflammatory arthritis, and the failed reconstructions. These are some common indications that we are using for that we are doing total hip replacements. So this is an approximate percentage why we are doing total hip replacements. So the contraindications for surgery. The absolute contraindication for surgery is the active infection. Only active infection is the only absolute contraindication for total hip replacements. And the related contraindications include morbid obesity, abductor musculature weakness, tobacco, alcohol use, and osteoporosis. What is not a contraindication? This is that not at all a contraindication to do surgery is an asymptomatic bacteriuria or a chronic low-grade infection of the opposite hip. Even if there is a chronic low-grade infection of the opposite hip, we can proceed on with the total hip replacement. Now coming to the pre-operative evaluation. The main pre-operative evaluation to be done during a total hip replacement is the general debility, comorbidity of the patient is being assessed, cardiac, pulmonary, and renal status are assessed. Any comorbid illness like hypertension, diabetes should be addressed and controlled, and any antiplatelet and anticoagulant should be stopped before 7 days of the surgery. And any mucosal lesion, pyogenic skin lesions, and dental problems should be addressed and treated, and then total hip replacement is being done. The tobacco cessation is very must. Urinary retention, if present, should also be treated. And to rule out any inflammatory pathology, then ESR CRP should be done, and it has to be normal before taking up on total hip replacement. Before pre-op management, pre-operatively, close exceeding wash of the operative site should be done. Physical examination of spine should be done, and the strength of the abductor musculature is definitely evaluated by internal blood tests. And limb and discrepancy and adductor contraction, fixation deformity, all these things are evaluated before doing a surgery. And the pain in the hip should be discriminated from other causes of hip pain, such as vascular claudication, trochanteric bursitis, and pubic rami fracture. These could also mimic an athletic hip, and this should be eliminated before taking up a total hip replacement. And the most important thing is to discuss with the patient regarding the post-operative and the rehabilitation process before taking up a surgery. Patient should be thoroughly counseled regarding the post-operative managements. The true arthritic pain, as we discussed, it is placed exactly in the groin on the lateral aspect of the foot, and it is usually worse with the activity, relieved with the rest, and limited weight bearing. So, limb in arthritic hip is classically positioned at flexion, external rotation, and adduction with an apparent shortening. This is a true arthritic pain, and the clinical feature you will find in an arthritic hip. Now, pre-operative radiographs. For the pre-operative radiograph to be done, an anteroposterior view of pelvis along with bilateral hip joint with the femoral column is being taken. So, to check whether the radiograph we obtained is an correct one, make sure that the ilium is placed at the same level at the both the things. And the operator foramen should be same on the both sides to avoid any rotation in images. This tells us that the radiograph we obtained is perfect. And points to be evaluated in an X-ray is that points to be evaluated in an X-ray is that acetabular size should be assessed, femoral canal, and the osteophytes in the placement should be, And using this X-ray technique, we can also identify the implants we are about to use during the intraoperative periods. This is my preoperative X-rays. The things we see in the preoperative X-rays is this: there will be a joint space narrowing, the osteosclerosis, and the osteophytes are seen in the preoperative images of an osteoarthritic hip. There is also a narrowed joint space from the loss of cartilage, and bone spurs are also seen. These are the radiographic findings you will see in an osteoarthritic hip. And loss of sphericity is also seen as an X-ray finding in the preoperative diagnosis. Loss of sphericity. Now, the preoperative templating for total hip replacement is given by Capello. First, the three important prerequisites to do an preoperative template is that we should take an AP pelvis with bilateral hip joint. As I said earlier, the ilium should be at the place at the same level with the obturator foramen equal on both sides, assuming telling that there is no rotation, and it should be in conventional X-ray without the magnification, and the hip should be rotated at the internally rotated at 15 degrees for better femoral geometry and on the offset calculations. This is very important before templating the preoperative X-rays. So first thing we have to do is to find the limb length discrepancies. A line is drawn from connecting two ischial tuberosities, and another line is drawn from the lesser trochanter. This discrepancy will tell us the limb length discrepancy. The lesser trochanter levels at the two femurs will tell us there is a limb length discrepancies. First thing is we should find out that there is an limb length discrepancy. The second thing we are going to find in an X-ray is that acetabulum layout. Now the acetabulum, which is given by the instrument company, we have to overlay the acetabulum to the acetabulum in the number of our conventional X-ray. The thing should be noted is that the inferior most part of acetabulum overlay should be at the level of obturator foramen, and the medial most part of the acetabulum should be at the level of teardrop. These two things should be done, and the center of femoral head is marked. Center of acetabular head is marked. And now after calculating the acetabulum, what we now do is we find out the femoral strength. So we given by the company instruments, we use the templates and match the femoral implant according to the femoral canal we have taken on the conventional X-rays. For a cementless implant, this should be 100. This should be snug fit. For cemented implant, 80% of the canal should be fitted by the implant, and 20% is to be filled out by the cement. And now for rotation, one we find is acetabular rotation of center using the acetabular overlay, and a femoral head center is being assessed. This difference. Just a minute. The femoral rotation of center and the acetabular rotation of center is being assessed. This difference will roughly correspond to the limb length discrepancies. Limb length discrepancy will also be the same as in the between femoral rotation of center and acetabular rotation of center. What we achieve during total hip replacement is that we bring the femoral rotation of center to the acetabular rotation of center and making it in a single column. This is what we are doing. And the most contraindication to do it templating is that in external rotation deformity of it, we cannot draw this template. Now the surgical approach. Surgical approach, we use standard posterolateral approach with posterior dislocation of it. This is a modification of Gibson and Murray posterior approach. And the position we use as a lateral position. And the incision is the curvilinear incision, centering the greater trochanter. And the proximal most point is the point where ASIS and the greater trochanter meets. That is the proximal most point. And the distal point is from 10 centimeters from the greater trochanter. These are the landmarks of the incision. The proximal most is for the femur, and the distal most incision is for the acetabulum. Within the proximal Proximal extension is still this proximal point of incision. And there is no true internervous pain during this approach. And the superficial discussion for initially the subcutaneous tissue is cut, and the tensor fascia lata is cut in the distal part. The gluteus maximus proximally separated along the lines of incision. A self-retaining catheter is self-retaining retractor is placed. And now for the deep dissection, the trochanteric bursa is divided. The sciatic nerve is the most important landmark to be preserved. The sciatic nerve is the most important thing to be preserved during the surgery. It goes very superficial to the operator internus and deep to the piriformis. So we have to safeguard the sciatic nerve before operating, before going further. So it is usually done. The limb is the short external rotators are made taut by internally rotating the limb. So the sciatic nerve goes downwards. The incision has to be made in the external short external rotators, so close to femoral attachment, and the muscle is everted along with the sciatic nerve. So this preserves the sciatic nerve during surgeries. Now the capsule is identified. The capsule is divided, and the head is dislocated by flexing. Head is dislocated by flexing, adducting, and internally rotating the hip joint. So after dislocating, the head is being osteotomed out of the femur. When you have any difficulties in dislocating the head, you should address these three important issues. There will be an improper excision of the capsule. There will be inadequate clearance of osteophytes, or the intact ligamentum teres and the fovea. These three things should be the first thing you should address during any difficulty in dislocating a head. After which we can proceed on with the osteotome and removing the head. So the next thing comes after removal of the head. The first thing we do is an acetabular preparation. The most important thing during acetabular preparation is we should identify the transverse acetabular ligament. This is the most important ligament which acts as an which helps us during the surgery. The acetabular reamer we place is placed just superior and parallel to the transverse acetabular ligament. So the reamer is the edges of the acetabulum is trimmed, and the osteophytes are removed using the osteotome. The ligamentum teres is being excised, and the most important thing is the placement of the reamer. It is placed at the 45-degree inclination to the floor and 15-degree being antiverted. The reamer is being the reaming is done at an increasing 1 to 2 mm in each excessive reamers. So so this is an image. The reamer is placed. The reamer is placed 45 degree to the floor, and 20 degrees antiversion is being done. So this is the placement by which acetabular reaming is done. Once when reaming is complete only if all the cartilages are removed. Any subchondral cyst is being curated, and grafting is being done. So acetabular component can be inserted in two ways: by a cemented acetabular component or an uncemented acetabular component. For a cemented acetabular component, we usually have multiple drill holes being made in the subchondral bone, and curated is done, and the strict hemostasis is achieved, and then cement is being injected into the multiple drill holes before inserting the acetabulum. These are the methods by which cement is being injected into acetabulum. So this reaming is being done. Cartilage is completely removed till the cartilage is completely removed, and the subchondral bone is being exposed. And these are the pressurizing instruments we use in the acetabulum after injection of cement. So for uncemented acetabular components, that transverse acetabular ligament acts as an anatomical reference. So the component, as I said earlier, is placed just parallel and just superior to it all, and it acts as a reference guide in reaming of the acetabulum. So the next important thing is insertion of screws. In screw fixation, the most preferred side is the posterior superior quadrant of the acetabulum. This is what we use for the screw fixation, because the other three parts, whatever if we insert the screw, may injure the following vessels. The posterior inferior, if we insert the screw, it may injure the sciatic nerve and the gluteal vessels. Antero-superiorly, the important structure which is the external iliac vessels, and antero-inferior is the obturator nerve and the vessel. These two things, anterior screws are completely contraindicated because it goes into the pelvis. So we are usually prefer the posterior superior quadrant. Now, to assume a posterior superior quadrant, first mark an ASES on the center of our acetabulum. Connect these two lines and extend the line downwards, and draw another line perpendicular to the first line drawn. So this posterior superior quadrant is the where we usually insert the screws. Anteriorly, we do not use the screw because it goes directly into the pelvis. So we do not prefer anterior screws. We usually prefer the posterior superior quadrant screws. The screws were commonly used are 6.5 mm cancer screw, which the size does not exceed mostly 25 mm in length. So these are the images of the acetabular implants. The first one being the reamer. The second one is the trial fit being used. And the third and fourth image are the liner being inserted. So the femoral preparation, once the acetabular preparation is done, a sponge is being kept over the acetabulum, and the femoral preparation is being started. The femur is internally rotated and hip is abducted and flexed. Tibia is aligned exactly perpendicular to the floor, with the proximal femur is pushed out of the wound. These are the prerequisites which should be done before starting the femoral preparation. The most important aspect in the femoral preparation is that inadequate bone removal will cause varus deformity of the femoral component. So the first thing we have to do is that the broaches should be placed lateral mostly. Lateral most it should be placed, and the entry is being made laterally and is directed towards the medial condyle of the femur. So this eliminates the varus alignment of the femur. And then says the reamer is placed at laterally towards the greater trochanter and pointed towards the medial condyle of the femur. So this is most important while preparing the femoral preparations. So cementation techniques in femur. Same as acetabulum, the femur can be inserted by both cementation techniques and also by uncemented techniques. By cementation technique involves mixing of cement. It involves four phases. The first one being the mixing phase, waiting phase, working phase, and the setting phase. Each thing has a different time duration. For the mixing phase, it is up to 1 minute when both the powder and liquid are being mixed. The waiting phase is the chain propagation starts, and the working phase is the place where we apply the cement into the femoral canal. The cement is being applied during the working phase. And for the setting phase, there will be no movement whatsoever of the cement. So cementation is done by two methods. One is being manually, cement is being applied into the femoral canal, or by using cement with the long nozzles. There are different generations being used for cementation techniques. This is an components of acrylic bone cement. Powder is an polymethyl methacrylate polymer with an initiator of benzyl peroxide. Antibiotics we can use is in gentamicin. The liquid we use is a monomer, which is a methyl methacrylate. The stabilizer we have in this is an hydroquinone. These are the components we use in the bone cement we have. These are the cementation techniques. The first generation, just the finger packing is being done without a distal plug. The second generation, a distal plug is being used. The third generation, a proximal seal is being applied. And in the fourth generation, we have a proximal centralizer for the uniform distribution of the cement. These are the four generations of cementations. I'll show you the images in the next slide. So this is the first generation where you have a finger packing method, and this is the second generation where we use the distal plugs. These are the distal plugs placed over the femur here, to avoid lower distribution of cement. And this is the number. These are third generation. These two are third generation by proximal seal. This is an instrument used as a proximal seal, or even the thumb can be used as a proximal seal to maintain to make sure that cement is dispersed in all directions uniformly over all the canal area. And this is a central gun with a long nozzle and pressure central pressurizer used in the fourth generations. So after surgery, after the insertion of femur component, femoral head, and the acetabulum, the hip is being moved, hip is being mobilized on the operating table. If we found that the flexion, adduction, internal rotation, there is an impingement, then the anterior lip of acetabulum osteophytes has to be removed. If it occurs in the external rotation, then the posterior aspect of greater trochanter and the rim of acetabulum are to be checked for any osteophytes. And for the stable hip, post-operatively, on the operating table after fixation of implants, all these three things are to be checked for a stable hip. First thing we have to do is extend the hip completely and make it in 40-degree external rotation. The implant has to be very stable. And second thing is flexion of the hip to a 90-degree with the internal rotation up to 45 degrees. This is the second step to find that the hip is very stable. And the third is a flexion of up to 40-degree in adduction and axial loading is being done. This is known as the sleeping position. If in all these three things the THR is stable, we can assume that the hip has been very stable after our implant. And after which there is a soft tissue repair and closure is being done. So first, the capsule is being closed, external rotators are reattached, gluteus maximus is repaired, and all these things helpful in reducing the post-operative dislocation. TFL is closed in the close approximated sutures, and skin closure is being done afterwards. So another concept is an hybrid THR. Hybrid THR is nothing but a cemented femoral component and an uncemmented acetabular component. This is a hybrid total hip replacement. This is an X-ray for this session. So the post-operative care, the most important thing to do in a post-operative care is to maintain the limbs at the 15 degree of abduction while recovering from the anesthesia. Bed exercise and mobilization can be allowed on the same day. Quadriceps, ankle, and the gluteal isometric exercises and rotational exercises are started on the same day. Patient is allowed to sit in the bed on the same day. On weight bearing depends upon the age, cementation, and the bone graft. In cementation techniques on the snug fit, the patient can weight bear on the same day of the surgery with the supervision. So if the components are cemented, early weight bearing is advised on the same day. The bony ingrowth in the non-cemented occurs at the 6 to 8 weeks in an uncemented implants. So until then, for uncemented implants, weight bearing is until then limited weight bearing is advised for the initial 6 to 8 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks, then crutches, and afterwards, after 3 months, patient can walk without the crutches. So what not to do after THR is that the patient is strictly advised not to do jogging, heavy sports which requires repeated stress on the femoral head. Heavy weightlifting is absolutely contraindicated. Squatting and manual labors are absolutely contraindicated after total hip replacement to avoid dislocation and further stress into the femoral heads. Thank you.